Welcome to Candlewick Library. I'm Cheryl. Today I'm sharing what I read in June. Obviously, the bulk of my reading in June was for the Red, White, and June Readathon. That was such a fun thing to take part in. I really enjoyed reading so many Revolutionary era books in June, but I also did read some books for the June journey with the Inklings and then just some books that had nothing to do with either one. I read so much in June. I had no idea that I was going to be able to read this much. There were some DNFs, which I'll talk about as I go along, but for the most part, I read a lot of books that I really enjoyed and was able to, like I said, get through way more than I expected. So today I'm going to first talk about the books I read for the Red, White, and June Readathon, and then I'm going to share the ones I read that counted for that, but I read with my daughter in homeschool because we're also in the Revolutionary era in school, and then the books I read with her that had nothing to do with that, and then the books that I read for the Inklings, and then the random ones I read. So that's how I'm going to order this one. I did one book for each of the prompts, and that included one fictional, one non-fictional, and then I did one for each of the other prompts as well. And then I read extra ones. So the first one that was exclusively for the Readathon was Patriots, Redcoats, and Spies. And this is by Robert J. Skeed and Robert A. Skeed. And this tells the story of two twin brothers who are with their dad, and their dad is a spy for George Washington, and he gets injured, so he gives the young boys the task of going and finishing the job that he was trying to do. So I had some mixed feelings about this one. This is definitely a middle grade book. I was not a huge fan of the twins in this. I thought that they could be kind of annoying sometimes, but overall I enjoyed the reading of the story. And I think that it is a really good introduction to the spy network and the Revolutionary War for middle grade age kids. There was one part toward the end that was a bit violent. So I would say that it probably not for sensitive kids. Then I read George Washington's Secret Six by Brian Kilmeade and Don Yeager. And I read this for my prompt, The Quill and Parchment, which was a book about spies. It had a really great overview of the Revolutionary War as a whole and the need for spies. It went through the agents that are the main agents and kind of gave us a feel of who they were and why they got involved. And then there was some speculation of, okay, who is Agent 355? The woman, we don't know for sure who she is. They went through some options. This had a ton of information. So it is a really good resource if you're interested in learning more about George Washington's Secret Six. However, what I kept thinking while I was reading it is that if you want to know about the Culper spy ring, but you don't care about knowing every detail, you just want something for your kids or for yourself that gives you an overview of it that is shorter and does give you the same information, but just doesn't give you every detail of it, the Totally True Adventures, George Washington's Spies, that I shared on my recommendations video, I feel like that gave just as much of the overview as this did, and did it in 100 pages. And so I feel like that I would recommend to someone who just is interested in it, just wants to know a little bit about it, to read that one instead. But if you want all of the information, all the details, then come to this one. Or if that one interests you enough, you want to learn more, then come to this one, because I did love this, but I also am very interested in spies and in that time period. So it would make sense for me to want to read both. But for some people, they might not need this much information if they just are slightly interested. Then I read Rebellion 1776 by Laurie Halse Anderson. This one I originally was going to use for one of the prompts, but I changed it to something else. This I was not a huge fan of. It wasn't bad at first. I didn't dislike it at first, but I did, after a few chapters, I found that I was really bored and I just didn't care. I didn't want to go back to the story. I skimmed some of it to see if it would get better, and it just didn't for me. I think that this is a for me thing. I think there are others that might like this a lot. I didn't find anything that was really wrong with it, at least in the parts that I read or skimmed. So this was a DNF technically. Like I said, I skimmed quite a bit of it, and then I went to the end and read the ending. And this, I feel like it covers more of the smallpox and the inoculation that people were doing for the smallpox. That felt like more of the story than anything. I felt like there were so many other books that are so much better that I wouldn't recommend this one. The one thing that I did like about this book is that at the beginning of every chapter, there would be a quote that was from an original source, and I liked that part of the book. Then I had forgotten to mention this book in a TBR or my recommendations video. It was a book that I completely forgot about somehow. And this is The Sherwood Ring by Elizabeth Marie Pope. I read this many years ago, and I've been wanting to reread it for a long time. My daughter had read it a few years ago and really enjoyed it as well. And so I really wanted to reread it. I didn't remember very much about it. I remembered there were ghosts and that had something to do with spies. And I'm kind of glad that I didn't, because I went into this with very fresh eyes and I absolutely loved this. This was one of my favorite books of the whole month. It is a story of a young girl. Her father dies, and so he tells her to go to her uncle's home. And her uncle is kind of a secretive man, and he's not very warm to her, I guess. But she goes to stay at this house, and on the way she meets a guy who is there to try to find out some information about some people in the past. She also gets kind of drawn in that of wanting to know some of this information. And you learn the story of the past, of the Revolutionary era, by these 4 ghosts that come to her and tell her the story. Each one of the important characters from the past comes back to her and tells her their part of the story, and so it builds upon that as you go along. And they're not scary ghosts, they're not creepy ghosts, it's very cozy, and I just thoroughly enjoyed it. I loved the story, I loved the characters, I thought it was really well written and interesting. The funny thing is that then it also led me to really want to know more about this author. So if anyone knows more about her, any books or movies that talk about her, let me know. Because that is something I want to pursue at some point, is learning more about her, because I have another book by her called The Perilous Guard, and I don't remember very much about that one, except I do remember loving it as well. And I looked her up after reading this, and because it looked like that was the only thing she had written was these 2 books. And she was a professor of English and mythology, and she got a PhD in the 1940s. And I just thought that is such an unusual thing for that time period that it really makes me want to learn more about her. So again, I highly, highly recommend The Sherwood Ring. Then I had another DNF. This is The Love Letter by Rachel Hauck. I have loved books by her in the past, and this book sounded so good. This is the one that I was reading for the prompt Faith That Endures. And I was really excited for this. The idea of a dual timeline of modern day actors acting out a movie that was based on letters from people in a Revolutionary era time period, that sounded so interesting. And that is exactly what it is. Chloe is in the future, or in the present tense right now, and she is an actress. Her family are famous actors, and she, is friends with this director, so she's able to go to his house and ask him for this part, playing this person that she feels drawn to. And then we get, in the other timeline, we get the actual revolutionary characters that they are playing in the movie in the future. There's also the boy she meets that is the screenwriter, and he has the letter that it's all based on. So it sounded really good. I got going. I just was not liking the people in the present. I didn't care about them at all. I felt like that their relationship felt very instant, but also I didn't really feel like it had a lot of depth to it. And so I was enjoying the revolutionary time period more. But then as that went along, I stopped enjoying that too. For me, it was more kind of the content of it. There was one part where in the revolutionary time period, the guy is talking about his desire that he is feeling for this woman. And he says that he felt it in his loins. And then 5 seconds later, Jesus appears to him and is talking to him. And I just thought that was really odd. That just felt weird to me. And then I also noticed a lot of scenes in the book that felt very much like they were taken right from The Patriot, the movie with Mel Gibson. And then she says something about worthy of a Mel Gibson movie or something. And I did see, I think it was in her author's note, that she said that she was inspired by The Patriot. So obviously she put a lot of that into the book, but I didn't know that at first. And so I thought it was kind of out of place. I did eventually DNF it because I was not enjoying it. I did go to the very end to see what would happen. And this is another one of those books where I read the end and I'm like, yeah, I'm glad I didn't waste any more time on this because I thought the ending was dumb. So again, this might just be me, but I did not enjoy this book at all. I would not recommend. Then I read George Washington's Rules of Civility and Decent Behavior in Company and Conversation. This also included his inauguration address. This is a very quick read. It's basically just reading quotes, just little tidbits. It took me like 15-20 minutes to read, if that. A lot of these things I'm not very good at, I realized as I was reading it. I really did enjoy seeing what he was trying to live up to himself. One of them that I wrote down that I really liked was number 56. Associate yourself with men of good quality if you esteem your own reputation, for it is better to be alone than in bad company. I'm glad that we own this, and I enjoyed reading it this month, leading up to such an important anniversary. Then I read Meet Felicity. I wanted to read at least one of the Felicity books this month, and I think that these are better when you read the whole series together because it was good. It's cute. It's wholesome. I have a connection to Felicity because I have read them before and I love the movie. If you've seen the American Girl movie about Felicity, you know that it's a lot of it is about a horse and how she loves horses and she's wanting to save a certain horse. And that really is this story. This doesn't have as much of the other side stories. This is really mostly just the story about Penny. And so there's nothing wrong with it. It was another really fast read and I enjoyed it. But like I said, I would recommend reading all of them together to get the whole picture. And I just didn't do that this month because I don't own all of them for one. We got them at the library before. I like horses. I was never a girl that was obsessed with horses or loved horses. One of my daughters does or did when she was little, but I never did. And so I probably don't connect to that part of it as well as some people would. So this is a good book. I still recommend the series as a whole, but it wasn't one of the standouts of the month. Then I read Sophia's War by Avi. This one was really hard to put down. It begins with Sophia seeing Nathan Hell be hanged. And so it shows how she is affected by that. And then her brother is fighting for the Patriots. And so that's a lot of the storyline, is wondering where he is, wondering if he's okay. And then when she finds out, trying to do something about it. But they also get someone who comes to live with their home. I don't want to give away too much of the story, but one of the British people comes to stay with them and she does end up liking him. And it felt a little bit inappropriate, their relationship. He was very flirty with her and she was much younger than him. And she definitely developed feelings for him. But that really didn't go anywhere, so I didn't really care too much about that. And it really did fuel the rest of the story. What happens, that part of it is important to what happens. It's a little bit tricky because it is a real people. He was a real person. So I knew what was going to happen at the end somewhat. I just didn't know what the fictional part would be for her to get there. I did really like it. And I feel like he's giving the idea that maybe this young girl is Agent 355. So that was an interesting twist on it as well. And I did enjoy it. I thought this was really good. I think that it's another one that wouldn't necessarily be for sensitive readers because there is hanging and the prison ship and what the men were going through on it. It shows a different part of the war than a lot of the other middle grades I've read. So I really did like this one. My favorite read of the month was A Founding Mother by Stephanie Dray and Laura Camoy. This is a novel of Abigail Adams. And if you've been around here long enough, you know that I pick my favorite book of the month from the ones that I haven't read before. So I did have 2 other books this month that would be favorites, and I'll talk about that at the end. But this would be the one that I chose for my favorite because of it being a book I had not read before. This tells the story of Abigail Adams, but it's in novel form. At the end, they do a really good job of talking about some of the things that they changed and dates that they changed, things that they maybe fleshed out more or left out based on what they wanted to tell, what they felt was the most important part to tell. And I really appreciated that because I've talked about before that I hesitate sometimes with books that are telling stories of true people because then I'm left wondering what was true and what wasn't at the end. So I really love it when they give you more information about that at the end. And you get the story of their life, of during the revolution, after the revolution. This tells a long period of time. If you don't want to know more than just the revolutionary time period, then you might get bored with this because it does go on. And there was a point toward the end when I thought, okay, probably had enough now. We can probably stop the story. And yet I still was enjoying it and appreciating it. So I think it was just because I was so focused on revolution at the time. And even though I feel like I know a lot about John and Abigail Adams, this still taught me things I didn't know. And so I loved that. It was such a good in-depth look at them and it made me love both of them even more. There was a part where I was getting mad at John and it was something that I kind of knew before, but I didn't know it to the depth that it was in this book. And it really annoyed me, but then he did make up for it. He apologized later and he knew how much of a jerk he had been to her at that time. So that also is a good thing about him. He wasn't afraid to apologize and to admit he was wrong. And I so appreciate that. And I just love Abigail. She was such a strong and wonderful woman. It was so well researched. I will definitely read more by these authors. You guys know that I was a little bit hesitant because I hadn't read anything by them before. I do have to do a few warnings. Obviously, there's going to be some violence in it because of the war. There's also a part where someone in this has breast cancer, and it is very detailed about how they remove the cancer. And I knew about that, but I did not know how they did it. And that part was so hard to read. So if you are squeamish at all, you could skim over it once you saw that what they were about to do, if you don't want all the details, but it is very detailed and it is really, really horrible. So that was the only thing that stood out to me that I knew that some people wouldn't want to read. But again, highly recommend it. It was my favorite book of the month. I'm so glad I read it. And then the last one that I read exclusively for the Readathon was Dear America, The Winter of Red Snow, Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, 1777, The Diary of Abigail Jane Stewart by Christiana Gregory. This was a last minute add-on because I was in a bookstore and I saw the cover and thought it was beautiful. And I'd heard people talking about the Dear America books. I've never read one before. At the end, for a second, I thought maybe everybody in this was real because the way the epilogue was written, because it gave information about what the characters go on to do. And it was kind of depressing information. And so I thought, oh, this must be real. But then it wasn't. Like the particular family were not real. So I don't know why in a middle grade the person would have deaths in the way that she did for something that didn't have to be on, that wasn't on page, if it weren't real. That was a little bit weird. And then I also would say that this probably isn't for sensitive children. Again, there's a lot of details of the hard things that were going on, which is important. But in a children's book, it's a small book. I feel like that people should know that going in, that it's not going to be a sanitized version of that. It definitely has some parts that were harder to read. I liked it. I wouldn't rush out to read more Dear America books after this one, but I wouldn't not read them either. So you'll have to let me know if you've read Dear America books, if you love them, which ones you've liked the most, if you've read this one, if you like other ones better. I could see myself revisiting it to see how I feel again in another time, but it wasn't a favorite. And I forgot to say the prompts that those were for. Fictional was Sophia's War. The nonfiction was The Rules of Civility. Secrets or Spies was Patriots, Redcoats, and Spies. Loyalist or Patriot, I used Sherwood Ring. Quill and Parchment was George Washington's Secret Six. Faith That Endures was The Love Letter. And then Courage and Petticoats, of course, was A Founding Mother. For the books I read that had to do with Revolutionary wartime that I read in homeschool with my daughter, first we read Benjamin Franklin, Young Printer. This is a Childhood, A Famous Americans book. And it says by Augusta Stevenson. It's kind of hard to read. It's over something. This was just a story of Benjamin Franklin's childhood. And I've said before that these Childhood of Famous Americans, we have quite a few of them. I really liked the Martha Washington and Abigail Adams ones. I don't feel like they're usually as good as the Heroes of American History books by the Bench, I think that's their last name, people, but they are good. And this one was no exception. This was good. It had a few things in it I had not read before about Benjamin Franklin's childhood, but the writing is pretty choppy sometimes. So I would say it is a younger read and a good introduction to Benjamin Franklin. It doesn't have any of the negative stuff of his later life in here. So it would be a good introduction. But if you want to know a lot about Benjamin Franklin, this is not where you want to get all of your information. And then we also reread What is the Declaration of Independence? This is by Michael C. Harris. And this is just a really good overview of the Declaration of Independence. If your child hasn't read anything else about it yet, this is a great book for it. Then this was a reread for me, but my daughter had never read it. This is My Brother Sam is Dead by James Lincoln Collier and Christopher Collier. It's a Newbery Honor book, and I read this book in school in junior high. I think I was in 7th or 8th grade, and I remember enjoying it, and I've kept it all of these years, but I've never read it again. So I've been thinking for years about reading it in school and seeing, if I still liked it. I was a little torn on that. It does have a lot more swearing than the other books. It's more YA for sure than middle grade. Some violence, one scene in particular that is true, where someone was beheaded. That part caught me off guard. But then in the afterward, they do talk about that is how that person died. I feel like it gave a viewpoint that you don't often see in the books about this time period, where it was showing some of the Patriots also doing bad things. And so I think it's an important book in that way too. It's more dramatic and more depressing maybe, which, it's war. There probably are books that should be that way sometimes. So I recommend this to some people, but not everybody, and with a grain of salt. And my daughter did say that she thought it was interesting. And it brought up some good talking points. We also did Decide and Survive, Agent 355 by Ryan G. Van Cleve and Mike Anderson. This is just a choose your own adventure book. So this is something we did over like 15 minutes. She did not make it, my daughter, to the end of the American Revolution with this book. So she made the wrong choice pretty quickly. So that was kind of funny. And so that was just a fun thing. So I think this was a fun book. If your kid likes choose your own adventure type things, then this is a great book. I've seen that they have a lot of other ones too with history. So that's probably a fun way to introduce these things to your kids. And then the main thing we were reading, the Tuttle twins, America's History, 1215 to 1776 by Connor Boyack and Elijah Stanfield. It's not really a textbook. If you've read any Tuttle twins books, they use these two twins to teach kids things. And so the Tuttle twins are learning something as they go along. And so you're learning it with them. So we started this a while back and then just finished it in June. We didn't read the whole thing in June, but we finished it right in time, right before the 4th of July, because it ends with them at a 4th of July parade and picnic. We are definitely going to continue with this next school year with volume 2. Because we use it more like a spine. We read it like a read aloud and then we discuss it, and then we're reading other books and doing other things with our history. My daughter and I had a big discussion yesterday after we finished this, and we both agreed that this is the most unbiased history we've read. It talks about things I've never seen a history curriculum talk about, and in important ways. And it really gets kids to think. And it isn't, in my opinion, telling them what to think. It's asking them to think about it. Every chapter would stop with some thoughts from one of the authors. And then it's like, what do you think? And so we would sit and discuss it. So I really enjoyed this. I highly recommend it as a spine for your homeschool. I've seen some people complaining about it online, saying it's too libertarian. I don't have a problem with that, but I also think that that is the problem, is sometimes people want to go too far on either direction of like everything in history is perfect and there was nothing wrong with anybody or anything, or everything wrong with everybody and everything. And so we both agreed this is one of the only history books that we have seen that's made for curriculum that doesn't do that. So we really enjoyed it. Not to do with the Revolutionary War. In school, we also read the first Percy Jackson book, Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Lightning Thief by Rick Riordan. This was a reread for me, but it's been a long time, but my daughter had never read it, and she did not like it. She didn't like it at all. We read it with humanities because we're getting into the Greek and Roman times and mythology. But I thought it was fun. I liked it better than the last time I read it, but she was not interested in continuing on with the series. So I will probably reread the rest of the series at some point in the next little while. If you are interested in Greek mythology, I think that it is a fun book. I did watch the new Disney adaptation, like that's a series, after reading it. I thought it was really well done. There were some changes in it, but I thought it was a pretty good adaptation. I recommend it if you are into that stuff. You just have to know, yes, Percy is snarky and sarcastic, but I thought it was good. Then for June Journey with the Inklings, I didn't fulfill every prompt. I did read my Bible because I read my Bible every day, but I also read The Myth Makers. This is a graphic novel of the remarkable fellowship of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien by John Hendricks. I thought this was really good. It was really well done. However, I knew almost everything in this already from other books that I've read about the Inklings and about them in particular. So it wasn't very exciting for me. So I would recommend it for someone who doesn't know anything about them, but I wouldn't necessarily say it is a must read for everybody. And then I said that I was going to try to reread the Out of the Silent Planet and then read the rest of the Space Trilogy, Perelandra, and That Hideous Strength. And I did. I was able to get to all three. I barely finished That Hideous Strength yesterday. It was so interesting, and I'm so glad I reread it, because I loved Out of the Silent Planet this time, and I hated it last time. So I was never going to finish reading it, but because I needed to read That Hideous Strength for a class I'm going to be taking, I decided to reread all of them, to reread it and then read the others. But I loved it. And I think part of that is I listened to the Literary Life podcast episode about it as I was reading, and I got so much out of it from them. But I also enjoyed it on my own account too, before I listened to the episodes. So it tells a story of Ransom, who is kidnapped basically and taken to a different planet and meets the creatures there. I don't want to give too much away, and so I won't even talk really about Perelandra and That Hideous Strength of what's in them, but I loved it. And Perelandra I really liked too. That one also follows Ransom. That Hideous Strength was a little bit different because while Ransom was in the book, it centered more on Mark and Jane, two other people. And then it was more of a dystopian. He called it a fairy tale. And because I've learned more about the fairy tale format, I guess, over the last few years, I could see that. I would look at it and think more dystopian. And the class I'm going to be taking has it, grouped with totalitarian novels. But I highly recommend this. The first two, like I said, feel more sci-fi, and the third one a little bit less so. But it is a really good overarching story. I loved learning that the reason it even existed was because Tolkien and Lewis wanted to write stories that they wanted to read, and they did a coin toss to see who wrote a time travel and who wrote a space travel. And so C.S. Lewis had the space travel, and that's why he started this. I thought that was a really cool tidbit. I don't know what else to say about it without spoiling it, but I do recommend it. If you like C.S. Lewis's books, I would recommend trying these, unless you absolutely hate sci-fi. But also, if you've started it before and didn't like it, I would recommend giving it another try, because it went from a book that I didn't think I would ever want to read again to a book I love. And I'll probably talk more about that Hideous Strength, and maybe this in general, after I do the whole class. I'll probably make a video about the books that I read for the class and whatever the class does to see if I recommend that or not. That will probably be in a couple of months. And then the books that I read that had nothing to do with any readathons, I read The Curious Case of Benjamin Button by F. Scott Fitzgerald, and this is a short story in this book. I did not like it. I had seen the movie a long time ago, but I kept just asking myself questions. Okay, how does a woman give birth to a fully grown human? This doesn't make sense. And I'm sure that there's something I'm missing there. You know, it's not supposed to be taken so literally, but I just didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy the story at all. And I felt like it was really ridiculous. That one was not a win for me. My battery just died and I had to charge it and then come sit back down again to finish this. So it might look a little different. Hopefully it doesn't. But anyway, the next book that I read was Sphere by Michael Crichton. The last time I read this book was probably 20, 30 years ago. It was a long time. And I didn't remember liking it. In fact, I believe I gave it like 2 stars or something. And so I went into it knowing I wanted to reread it this year to see what I thought now. And I'm really glad I reread it because I actually enjoyed it a lot this time. It took a little bit to get going. And it's people that are brought together and they go down underwater to this ship that is down there that they're trying to figure out how it got there, because it seems like it's been there for a long time. And then there is a sphere inside of it. And so they think that there might be some kind of alien or something inside the sphere. And so you see the effect it has on everyone. And as the story goes along, it definitely gets more intense. I felt like the fact that it did move a lot slower than some of his other books, that it actually added to the suspense and made me more anxious as I was reading it, wondering, you know, when is it going to pick up, since I remembered certain things, but not everything. So it was not a perfect book. There definitely is some language. And then the ending I thought was really interesting, but I didn't love the way it ended. So it's not a favorite of Michael Crichton, but I definitely enjoyed it. I enjoyed reading it and I liked it a lot more than the last time. So if you like Michael Crichton, you could give it a try and see what you think. I read 3 other nonfiction besides the Revolutionary War nonfictions. The first one was The Practice of the Presence of God with Spiritual Maxims by Brother Lawrence. This one has kind of an interesting story to it because I participated in the tag where we were all sharing a nonfiction Christian book that has changed our life. And Anne at In Search of Wonder had talked about this book. And I had just started doing this book study with Sarah Clarkson on her book, Reclaiming Quiet, which I've read before, but I'm rereading it again right now. And she does a video every single week talking about the chapter we read that week. And that day that those videos went up, I read the chapter and watched her video that was for that week because I was a few days late on it. And she talked about this book. And I thought that was so odd. And then I went on Instagram and I think it was, I can't remember who shared it, but someone was sharing that on the Ascension app, that they were doing a read along with this book. And I thought, this is too much to have within 24 hours, have 3 different places talk about a book that I'd never heard of before. So I ordered it and I read it, and I did watch the videos on the Ascension app, and I really liked the book. I feel like as the book went along, I lost steam with it a little bit, but the very first part of the book was really meaningful to me, and I wrote down a lot in a little journal that I was writing in. So I really enjoyed the experience. It's really short, but I read it over a few weeks because I was reading it a little bit every day with the Ascension app. But I definitely recommend it. I think it was a really good book. It's just very much about, you don't have to have everything perfect in your life. You don't have to have a perfect place. You don't have to be doing everything in a certain way to have the presence of God. You can have it washing the dishes and doing the simplest of things. And I think that that's a really important thing to remember. And then just the way Brother Lawrence, he presented himself and his relationship with God was really comforting. And yeah, it's something I'll think about for a while. I really enjoyed it. Then I read Like, Follow, Subscribe by Fertessa Latifi. This is all about influencers online who exploit their children, which I believe is pretty much everybody whose content is only their children. This is not, okay, you have a kid who shows up in your videos occasionally, or that you talk about, or, you know, something like that, but the ones where everybody watching or following you gets to see every single little thing your kids do. And it was really interesting. This was recommended to me, and I, based on what the person said, as what I wanted to read, because there's a whole entire chapter about Mormon influencers. And anyone who knows anything about influencers, especially family vloggers, will know that many of them, most of them, are LDS. And I had just had a conversation with a couple of different people about that within a few days of starting this book. So that was interesting. It does talk about how so many of these people noticed right away that their viewers, their views and their comments and everything go up the more dramatic the video is. So if they have a thumbnail that's a kid crying, or, you know, talking about something extremely personal, or somebody's sick, or they go to the hospital, or whatever, or, you know, their pet dies or something like that, they are going to get tons of views. And so they cash in on that. They are taking advantage of the things that embarrass and hurt their children to get views. But it really does just make you so frustrated, because even when they are shown, most of your viewers are men that are commenting on your daughters in really inappropriate ways and still posting videos about them in ways that feed that. So it was a really frustrating look at that, I guess, but also very important, I think, because I think that there's still a lot of people that don't understand how much this is exploiting children, and how much these people are faking and making it up so that people will watch them. She had information from nannies and different people that worked for these families, and they talk about how there was one mom who did a whole video series on potty training your children, and it was the nanny that did it. But of course, they don't mention that or show that. And it says on here, what's not included in these courses, any mention of their nannies or cleaners, because it was talking about families who have entire courses on life planning and how to do it all and how to organize your life. And yet they don't mention the fact that they have house cleaners and they have chefs and they have nannies. So the average person will go and spend a ton of money on these courses, and it's not going to help them because they don't have the help those people had. It's very dishonest. So then in the chapter about Mormon influencers, she goes through, which was very interesting because I already knew this, but she really goes through it, about how there are certain leaders at the top of the LDS church who have actively asked people to share this. And that is true. They told us to flood the internet with things, and it says, let your voice be heard in this great cause for this gospel. And so she goes through like how the LDS church actually is so small in percentage of people in the United States, and yet so many of the influencers are. And so that's an interesting thing. You can see I've underlined so much because she goes through where it comes from, why they want to present themselves a certain way, and how much you are told to, and how Mormons, you know, believe in the prosperity gospel, which is the concept, if you're faithful, God will bless you with material wealth. How Mormon women are expected to be these accomplished homemakers and look a certain way and do a certain thing. There's too much on here. One of these influencers I hadn't heard of. She's an Instagram one, and I looked it up, and it's funny because, you know, there would have been a time when I would have seen her and would have thought, no way, this person's not Mormon, because of how we used to be expected to dress all the time. But that has changed so much now. And this particular person talked about how much money she gets for the videos. So, you know, this Christmas, you guys are all going to see Light the World probably, and those the giving machines people put everywhere. Well, when you see an influencer going and buying something there, or these influencers are going and doing some other kind of charity work, they are getting paid by the church to do it. They are getting paid thousands and thousands of dollars. So she talked about how she felt bad asking for her full amount. And so she would ask for, I think it was $4,000 or $4,500, but found out that the other influencers weren't giving the church a good deal and were getting paid $6,000 or $7,000 for each, 2-minute video. So when you see these influencers and they are sharing church stuff, they are getting paid. She also talked about how they get invited to these big luncheons at the Joseph Smith Memorial Building in Salt Lake City. They can all network, and the fact that they are getting paid so much, I think that the average Mormon doesn't even know that. And certainly people would think they're sharing this stuff just because they believe in it, but really they're also getting paid. And some of them, who knows if they really believe it or not. I would like to assume that they do, but since so much of the other stuff is fake, who knows? It's a very interesting book. book. Really recommend it if you know anything or care about that kind of stuff at all. The other nonfiction I read was Murder in the 33rd Degree by Charles Theodore Murr. This is the Gagnon investigation into Vatican Freemasonry. I heard about this on Candace Owens' show. It sounded interesting to me, and when I looked at the cover, they're doing one of the hand tokens that you do in the Mormon temple. So I was very interested in that. The Mormon rituals in the temple are mostly taken from Freemasonry. It gives the real history of when the Vatican was trying to weed out members that they knew were at the top of their church that were Freemasons and were actively trying to bring down the Catholic Church, even though they were at the top. And the person that investigated it and the people who fought against it once it was exposed. And it was really, really interesting. So that led me to want to learn more about that too from this book. I would say that sometimes the book wasn't as well written. There were times when I was hoping it would give more detail, and sometimes when I felt like it wasn't as clear. So afterward, I went and watched a thing on YouTube about it, and that kind of cleared up all of the questions I had. But I definitely think it's interesting if you're interested at all in Freemasonry, how that they have infiltrated different governments or different churches. Gives you a pretty good overview from people who were involved, who did do the investigation. And yeah, so that was a really interesting book as well. The one other thing I was listening to the whole month was Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. I was listening to the full cast audio of that, and I really enjoyed that. When I said that I had two books that would have been my favorite of the month if I did rereads, that would have been Harry Potter, of course, and the Sherwood Ring. But since I always pick one that is a new read, A Founding Mother, definitely my favorite read of the month. It was a great reading month. Even though I did have a few DNFs, I had a few that I didn't like as much. I felt like I read so much more than I thought I was going to, and most of them were really interesting and really good. I would love to know if you've read any of these books or if any of these stand out to you, and if so, which ones?